Take a moment and think about the last time your power went out. Maybe it lasted a few minutes, maybe a few hours. You lit a candle, checked your phone, and waited for things to come back on. And eventually, they did. So it's easy to assume the system behind all of this is solid, reliable, built to handle whatever comes its way. But here's the reality most people don't see. The modern power grid is one of the most complex systems ever built, and that complexity is exactly what makes it more fragile than it appears. Not broken, not failing, but more sensitive, more interconnected, and more dependent on perfect balance than most households realize. Today, we're going to break that down in a clear, practical way. No alarmism, no speculation. Just a closer look at how the grid actually works, and why small disruptions can sometimes create bigger problems than expected. The grid is a balancing act. At its core, the power grid has one job: match electricity supply with demand in real time, not hourly, not daily, every second. When you turn on a light, electricity must be available instantly. When millions of people turn on air conditioning during a heat wave, the system has to respond immediately. There's no large-scale storage buffer built into the traditional grid. Power is generated and consumed, almost simultaneously. That means the entire system depends on constant balance. And maintaining that balance across an entire country is not simple. Demand is becoming less predictable. In the past, electricity demand followed relatively stable patterns. Morning increase, midday plateau, evening peak, nighttime decline. Utilities could plan around that. But today, demand patterns are changing. More homes rely on electricity for heating and cooling. Electric vehicles are being added to the system. Remote work has shifted daily usage patterns. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. All of this makes demand harder to predict. And when demand spikes unexpectedly, the grid has to respond quickly, or risk instability. Aging infrastructure. Another factor that often gets overlooked is infrastructure age. Much of the U.S. power grid was built decades ago. Transmission lines, transformers, substations. While many components are maintained and upgraded over time, parts of the system are still operating on infrastructure designed for a different era. An era with lower demand, fewer electronic devices, less continuous energy usage. As demand increases, that older infrastructure is placed under more stress. Not enough to fail constantly, but enough to reduce margin for error. The weather factor. Weather plays a bigger role in grid stability than most people realize. Heat waves increase electricity demand dramatically due to air conditioning use. Cold snaps can strain heating systems and fuel supply chains. Storms can physically damage transmission lines and substations. Wildfires can force utilities to shut down parts of the grid to prevent further damage. Each of these events adds pressure to the system. And when multiple factors combine, high demand, extreme weather, infrastructure stress, the grid becomes more vulnerable. Interconnected systems. The grid is not a single system. It's a network of interconnected systems. Regional grids are linked together to share power and maintain stability. In theory, this is a strength. If one region has excess power, it can support another. But interconnection also introduces risk, because disruptions can spread. A failure in one part of the network can affect other parts if the imbalance isn't corrected quickly. This is rare, but it's part of why grid operators take small disruptions very seriously. The role of automation. Modern grids rely heavily on automation. Sensors monitor conditions in real time. Software systems adjust generation and distribution. Protective mechanisms shut down parts of the grid if instability is detected. These systems improve efficiency and safety. But they also mean that the grid reacts quickly, sometimes by shutting down sections to prevent larger failures. From a household perspective, That can feel sudden. Power goes out, even if the original issue wasn't directly in your neighborhood. Why outages happen faster than expected. When you combine all these factors, real-time balance, unpredictable demand, aging infrastructure, weather stress, and automation, you get a system that works incredibly well most of the time, but has very little tolerance for imbalance. That's the key point. The grid doesn't fail slowly. It reacts quickly to protect itself. And those protective actions can result in outages, not because the entire system collapsed, but because parts of it needed to be isolated to maintain overall stability. The illusion of stability. For most people, electricity feels constant. You flip a switch and it works. Day after day, year after year. That consistency creates a sense of certainty. But behind that consistency is constant adjustment, continuous coordination, thousands of decisions happening every second. The system is stable because it's actively managed, not because it's unbreakable. What this means for households. So what does all of this mean for the average home? It doesn't mean the grid is unreliable. It means the grid is complex. And complexity introduces variables that are outside individual control. You can't control regional demand. You can't control infrastructure age. You can't control weather patterns. But you can control how dependent your home is on a single system. A shift in perspective. For decades, most households didn't need to think about this. The grid was simply there, always available. But as the system evolves, more people are starting to think differently, not in extreme ways, not abandoning the grid, but asking a more practical question. What happens if the system is temporarily unavailable? Not for months, but for hours or days. From dependency to stability. That question leads to a shift from total dependency to partial stability. Instead of relying entirely on one system, some households are beginning to think in layers, primary power from the grid, and a secondary way to maintain essential functions if the grid goes down. Not everything, just the basics: lighting, refrigeration, communication, because those few systems define whether an outage is a minor inconvenience or a serious disruption. The real takeaway. The goal isn't to fear the grid, it's to understand it, to recognize that it's a dynamic system, not a fixed one. And that understanding opens the door to better decisions, not reactive decisions during an outage, but proactive ones made ahead of time. On this channel, we explore these ideas in a practical way. No extreme scenarios, no unrealistic promises. Just clear explanations of how energy systems work and how households can adapt to them. In upcoming videos, we'll look at why electric bills keep rising even when usage drops, what really happens during multi-day outages, why common backup solutions don't always solve the problem, and how some households are building more stability into their energy use. If this kind of structured thinking is useful, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to explore practical approaches people are using to reduce reliance on a single point of failure and keep essential power available when the grid becomes unstable, there's a resource linked in the description. You'll also find it in the first pinned comment. It connects directly to what we discussed today, understanding the limits of the grid and what you can realistically do about it. Subscribe, check the link in the description or the pinned comment, and I'll see you in the next video.